Dystopia warning, obviously. Now, I've got some pretty bizarre breaking news to bring you tonight, because according to local reports, a spontaneous fistfight has broken out between Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Elon Musk round the back of a Tesco in Holborn. It's unclear how they encountered each other, but the fight is thought to be the result of recent tensions online spilling over into real life. A spontaneous crowd appeared waving England flags. Money exchanged hands, bets were placed. Eyewitnesses claim that Keir Starmer mercilessly beat Musk whilst yelling, and I quote, "Take that, you rocket-shagging in an uncharacteristic fit of rage. A bloodied Elon Musk called for his mother, who ignored him, and then as a last resort called for his dad. But unfortunately his dad was too busy stooping Musk's stepsister to intervene. Starmer won, and in short, we're now at war with America." And anyone that doesn't believe that any of this happened is obviously listening to politically biased fact checkers. Now let me start by asking you a few questions. How many times in the last week or so have you seen him making the headlines? Or him? How many times have you heard the term Pakistani grooming gangs? And where have you seen that? Despite, according to these statistics, Pakistani men making up 2% of chases compared to 88% of white British men. I'll tell you where I've seen it. First, on a prime time slot via Lurkensburg, obviously.
Dreadful abuse of young girls by groups of men of mainly Pakistani origin.
BBC love to push a far-right narrative, don't they? And then also via Trevor Phillips on Sky News, who uncritically quoted fash robot Robert Jenrick.
This scandal had started with our importing hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures.
Wow. Do you know what hasn't made the news? That Nosferatu-looking and his brother donating $30,000 to little Tommy 10 names. Mind you, from his time in the EDL, Tommy knows all about hanging around with nonces, doesn't he? There is a literal scroll of offences committed towards women and children by EDL members. And the Tate brothers themselves are accused of trafficking and R-wording a minor. Robinson even publicly thanked the Tate brothers. It's all about protecting the kids, isn't it? And women. Now, I spoke a little while ago about an international far-right network, all funding and supporting each other, all of which are linked to serious crimes themselves. Is that ever the headline? No, of course not. They've even rolled out Musk's mad dad, who met his now wife when he became her stepfather when she was aged 4. And what about Musk's associations? Well, there's his links to P. Diddy, aren't there? And we all know what P. Diddy's accused of. P. Diddy invested $10 million in Musk's takeover of Twitter. Musk is also the bitch of Donald Trump, aka Ugly Pat Butcher. I mean, look at the state of these men. They call themselves the master race. Not just that, no, Trump's cabinet, many of which have faced allegations themselves. So the picture that's being painted here is a group of men that have absolutely zero credibility when it comes to the well-being of women and children, co-opting a crime that predominantly affects women and children in an effort to push a certain narrative. Now, Musk is doing this all over Europe. I'm not going to dwell on the inane ramblings of a ketamine-addled soft boy. What we need to focus on is why he's doing this. I think we've all got a pretty good idea, haven't we? Musk is supporting the far-right rhetoric of Robinson in Britain, just as he's supporting the far-right in Germany. I would like to make one thing extremely clear. These terrible crimes are being co-opted by the far-right. They're suffering hijacked and weaponized by a group of people seeking to demonize, spread fear about, and propaganda about particular races. They're trying to give the impression that there was a soft approach to certain races, that political correctness gone mad or inclusivity prevented justice from being served, when it's far more likely that this was down to institutional misogyny, a culture of disbelief in society towards women and victims generally, and a complete lack of political will in the former Conservative government to do anything about women that are subjected to such crimes. So how are so many people falling under the spell of the far right in Britain? Well, there's multiple reasons. First of all, there's Musk and his platform Twitter. I'm not calling it X. The logo alone makes it sound like an interplanetary titty bar. He's jacked his algorithm to ensure that his posts get an enormous amount of reach so that right-wing voices dominate. He has flooded it with bots and suppressed dissenting voices. It's not a place for free speech or reasoned debate. It's a vessel for propaganda. Then there's also the challenges being faced in Britain. We are suffering from some kind of collective trauma as a country. People have been talking recently about trying to evoke a wartime spirit. How do you do that when the people that put you in the position that you're in were your own government? And that's how people like Reform are able to scoop up the disillusioned who don't trust politicians anymore. So they believe that badly varnished ventriloquist dummy who has a timeshare personality, part Call Blimey Governor Del Boy cosplayer, part Boxing Day fox hunt nights out at the Carlton, who is only in it for the money. He made 189 grand working very part-time for a gold bullion company last year. Man of the people. He's been cashing in on all of this despite Daddy Elon saying that he's not cut out to lead Reform. If Elon Musk had even the most basic Scooby about how British politics works, he'd know that Farage is Reform. I think all of us enjoyed watching Reform scrabble around in the dirt, continuing to praise Elon, still hoping for that donation. One of the most galling and disgusting parts of all of this has been how the Conservative Party have reacted. Essentially, with rabid racism, they've become the new Britain first. And at the forefront of that is Robert Jenrick, who referenced, as quoted uncritically by Phillips earlier, alien cultures with medieval attitudes towards women. Saying it with his whole chest, isn't he? And then there was Chris Philp, who was inexplicably made Shadow Home Secretary. Yeah, old Arnold Rimmer there, who said it was reasonable for Musk to reference grooming gangs. It's the context. Musk referenced the grooming gangs in support of Tommy Robinson and lashed out at Reform because they wouldn't let Robinson join their ranks. Now, there's many things that Reform are. Racist, manipulative, con artists, but not stupid. They know it'd be political suicide to let a former leader of the EDL into Reform. Conservatives has supported the lies that were spread about Jess Phillips, a woman that has dedicated her entire life to survivors. Dominic Grieve, an old school Tory and moderate who was obviously removed by the Conservative Party, was one of very few Tories to point out Keir Starmer was commended in the report, along with Nazir Afzal. He called for mandatory reporting of offences over 12 years ago. The Tories did not implement a single recommendation of the report. I wonder what they were busy doing. I actually don't have to wonder because I was busy documenting it for 4 years. They were busy creating more victims, getting kicked out of brothels, literally getting taken hostage, paying off their teenage rent boys, procuring hasty abortions, destroying Britain. Boris Johnson, then Prime Minister, referred to the £60 million that was spent at that point on the abuse inquiry as money spaffed up the wall. He used a colloquial term for jizz, and even now, out of power, they're contributing further to the decline, the division, the disinformation. They are leaping on this shamelessly, pushing overt racism and rhetoric designed to deflect from their failings. They're even calling for a second inquiry, and how have the press reported it? With shameless bias, claiming that the Tories have tried to save the day, but Labour voted it down, failing to mention that doing so would stop Labour from being able to implement a new bill to protect children. And these are the headlines. And people wonder how the fuck end up with Tory governments. So what's going on here? Well, it's the fact that billionaires own all of our information sources. They control the broadcasters. Look at the BBC, for example, headed up by Tories. The newspapers, owned by billionaires that don't even live in this country. Right-wing mouthpieces, themselves funded by shady billionaires who invest in their propaganda channels. Calling for Britain to become a branch of America. Cheering everything that lunatic says because he justifies their inherent bigotry. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, up pops Zuckerberg, who says that he's going to get rid of fact checkers to restore free speech. I don't know if you've seen this video, but it is legitimately chilling. If you haven't seen it, nothing can prepare you for his hair. It is basically fascism being calmly explained to you by a guy that partly resembles a dead-eyed pigeon with a perm and Chris Martin from Wish. One of the points that I found the most disturbing was that he referred to fact checkers as being politically biased. What the fuck? And also that he's going to move the moderation team from California to Texas to try to overcome bias. I'll tell you what this is. This is the start of what I said in my video after Trump had just won the election coming true. Billionaire CEOs with God complexes buying the government and the government buying them, inciting unrest, removing access to objective fact and reality. The consequence? Chaos. More interference in our politics, notably more election interference, nobody knowing what's real, radicalisation. This after Cambridge Analytica. This after bot farms from overseas interfering in our recent British election by pushing support of reform, something that had all the hallmarks of a Russian interference job but was described by Nigel Farage as being grassroots activism. Labour is in power, but the right-wing narrative perseveres. There should be focus on the victims, but there hasn't been, because the people in control don't give a fuck. When you get to a point where the opposition in this country are calling for the race of criminals to be released in reports, despite the reports already being released and sitting gathering dust on their desk for years, and the media continuing to spin it, helping the public to forget what the Conservatives put us through for 14 years, to the point where people are saying that making the winter fuel allowance means tested and making millionaire landowners pay a bit more inheritance tax is worse than Partygate. When you're getting to the point where Reform are polling on par with Labour, despite Labour actually implementing a lot of good policy, but that all getting buried in the mire of shit like this. I have to admit, I felt pretty hopeless in recent weeks, because how the hell do we counter such influence and power and money? What we need is a Prime Minister that's willing to tell Trump and his little flying monkey to fuck off. What we need is to realign with Europe, who are taking a stand against Musk's interference in European politics, because they can see as plain as day that his endorsement of far-right candidates in Europe is not just interference, but it's doing the work of autocrats. The con is obvious. Poor white men are their targets largely, and anyone else that doesn't fit into that criteria are the people that they're going to attack. One of his 5 MPs went to prison for kicking a woman repeatedly in an act of domestic violence. Doesn't stop Farage doing his tension inflaming, stochastic terrorism adjacent, they're hiding something from us shtick, does it? In situations like this and this, follow the money. Think about who's likely to see a return on investment for Trump doing something as mental as renaming the Gulf of Mexico, annexing Canada and invading Greenland. Stuff that it's actually quite difficult for me to say with a straight face because it's so mental. As ever, follow the money. It's Elon looking for a return on investment, isn't it? Disinformation is one of the biggest threats that we're going to face in the next decade. We failed to clamp down on the tech bros, and that's another reason why Zuckerberg wants to move his moderation to Texas, to avoid the law. To avoid any responsibility for what happens as a consequence of moderation or failure to moderate on his platforms. Disinformation is how elections will be fought and won. It'll be how wars are fought and won. It will essentially all be based on a thumbs up or a thumbs down from billionaires in the gladiator ring of online discourse. We are in a democratic recession. We needed laws against interference, foreign money, disinformation a long time ago. My only hope is that the new Labour government gets their act together quickly to provide Britain with some kind of defence. And as for crimes against women and children, just you wait until that fades into insignificance and they move on to a new talking point. I'm not having a crime that my gender disproportionately faces weaponised by the kind of men that when I would watch England play in the pub would grope me, tell me to get my tits out for the lads, and then statistically go home and beat their wives. The common denominator in terms of offender is the gender. And if you're going to base it on race, it's mostly white men, white Tories, white EDL members, misogynistic podcast bros, the orange new president of the USA and his sidekick, all accused, yet all in positions of enormous power. And that's why nothing was done. But I have a lot more confidence now that we have a Prime Minister that dedicated his career to ensuring that those that commit heinous acts towards women and children are imprisoned. And despite feeling beaten down, wondering how on earth we're going to counter billionaires, online psyops, there is one thing that we can hold on to. Truth. Facts matter. And as long as we hold on to the truth, we hold on to the facts, we won't go completely mad. Don't believe the headlines. Don't believe the bullshit. Fuck Elon Musk.